My dear friends, I am Ladislau Dobor, professor at the Catholic University of São Paulo, unfortunately an economist, but this can be useful. We've been trying to understand what happened to Brazil, and it is really very interesting because since 2003 and practically in 2 decades, we have lived through two radically different experiences. With the Lula and Dilma government, basically a redistributive system of promoting the population in this very unequal country, and from 2014 up to present, we have had a completely different experience, the austerity and neoliberal economy. And this comparison is very interesting. First of all, this period of Lula and Dilma, the distributive economy, from 2003 to 2013, this decade has been called by the World Bank the golden decade of Brazil. We had an average growth of 4% of GDP, which is very strong. We've had 18 million new jobs created. We took 40 million persons out of poverty, which was extremely, it's not only a question of economics, it's a question of justice, of a human approach, or even of ethics, I would say. It worked because we raised the minimum salary, and all this generated much more demand at the bottom of society, the mass of the population. They bought more products, and this stimulated business. They had to whom they could sell. So we had simultaneously a stimulation of the activity of demand in the families, and we had business working at a higher level. Both produced taxes on consumption, taxes on production, which meant that more money got into government than what we spent in promoting these policies. So we had a surplus. And with this surplus, government was able to stimulate even more public policies, social policies, health, education, and so forth. And on the other side, infrastructure, which is good for the productivity of business. And the system worked. The cycle closed. This is very interesting. Now, the system was interrupted by a political coup. The elites could not accept that the system, the process, was simply working. We had a parliamentary coup, and Dilma was impeached, and then we elected the present president, Jair Bolsonaro, who was elected with very thin legitimacy because he got elected because Lula, who was going to win the elections, was put in jail for the time of the elections, which was very purposeful. And Bolsonaro used massive fake news, and imagine fake news such as putting on opposition T-shirts that Jesus was gay and things of the kind. You know, this reaches people, and you direct them to the bottom of society. This is terrible. And he was aggressed with a knife, and this permitted that he could be elected without having to come on TV and debate his program, because obviously he had no program. But basically, from 2014, we have a quite different system. They chose Paulo Guedes, trained in Chicago, Milton Friedman, and so forth, this 1980, 1970, 1980 policies. We are going back to the classic neoliberal policies. Basically, they broke the system down. And from 2014 on, we have a paralyzed economy. In 2015, we had the GDP fell by 3.5%, in 2016 by 3.3%, and from then on we have a growth basically around 1%, basically 0% if you compare with population growth. The per capita is simply paralyzed. What is happening? Where is the money going? I did this research, wanted to present to you that basically how the full financial flow works. It is studied in different countries as the financialization process. But it is, in Brazil, it is simply grotesque, and it's easier to understand other experiences through the Brazilian experience. So, for example, on credit card, revolving credit, they charge 250%. These are official figures. In the US, people are angry because it reached 21%. But here in Brazil, 250%. Overdraft, 150%. Installments in commerce, 75%. Credit for persons, natural persons, in banks, 96%. This doesn't work. We had a population who was dealing with banks for the first time in their lives. And in Brazil, they presented these interest rates in monthly rates. So the population sees that this interest rate is 6, 7, 8%. Nobody knows how to calculate what this means in a year. So we have now 64 million adults in Brazil who are in bankruptcy. They can't pay what they already bought, so they are not buying anymore. So you paralyzed the economy in the main engine, which is the demand of the population. Now, on the other hand, when the business has no one to sell to, our productive system is working with less than 70% capacity because they don't have anyone to sell to. On the other hand, they have to pay, if they take a loan in a bank, 45% average. 45%, I mean, how productive can you be to pay such interest? You know, in fact, productive entrepreneurs, they do not need ideological discourse on the superiority of neoliberalism. They need people with purchasing power so they have to whom to sell, and they need cheap credit so they can invest. This is what works. This works in China, in South Korea, works in Canada, in so many countries with different political systems. So you paralyzed the purchasing capacity of families, and you paralyzed the business, and this means less money for government because you have less tax flows to government, which means that the deficit, which never existed up to 2013, now is roughly 5-6% of GDP. You paralyze the whole economy. And besides, they have this system of the public debt. Basically, roughly 5 to 6% of our debt is going to banks, to financial intermediaries. I pay my taxes, this goes to government, and government has, instead of investing in education, health, infrastructure, and so forth, has to transfer this to banks to finance the interest rate on the public debt. This is simply not working. The three main engines of the economy, family consumption, production and investment by enterprises, and investment by the government are paralyzed. Now, this has a strange impact. I mean, we're not a poor country. Our GDP is 1.8 trillion. We are the 9th economy worldwide. Well, if you divide this, it's a easy number to understand. If you divide this 1.8 trillion by the population we have, this means what we produce nowadays is $3,000 per month per 4-member family. What we produce nowadays is enough. You don't have to reduce inequality so drastically, let's say, just a little bit, to rescue some decency in how we have access to this money. Yes. So with a little bit of less inequality, we can have dignified and comfortable life for most of the population. Now, this paralysis now is evident, but what is interesting is that Forbes produced for us a study on the Brazilian billionaires. And this is very interesting because there are 206 billionaires in 2019 in Brazil, billionaires in reais, yes, but billionaires, it's quite enough. There were 74 billionaires in 2012, and we now have 206 billionaires. While the economy is stalled, we are on the same level of production now in 2020 as in 2012. Where does this money come from? The huge money. During these years, from 2012 to 2020, these billionaires have been growing their fortunes by 11% a year, which is gigantic. And the economy is paralyzed in a standstill. Yes. In the last 12 months, from 2018 to 2019, these fortunes grew by 23% with a paralyzed economy. So in fact, the money that is not going to consumption, not going to investment by business, and not going into public policies by government is going to the financial intermediaries. The interesting thing is that, in a way, we always looked at inequality on the basis of salaries. This continues. It is still a key challenge. But modern financialization has invented how to screw people with such kind of debt. Please don't mind if I say they're screwing the country and the economy, because this is an heterodox economy concept, and we are getting fed up with what is happening in our country. If you are interested, please have a look. This book will help you. The Age of Unproductive Capital. It is in English, chapters 12 and 13. You will have the detail of these numbers. I can guarantee they are serious numbers. And the understanding how we transformed this economy, how we paralyzed this economy, is useful not only to understand Brazil, but to understand what is happening in other countries as well. Have a good read. Thank you.